The Bible is full of ancient practices that are vastly different from our modern way of life. I mean, for example, what is a city of refuge, or a kinsman redeemer, or a threshing sledge, for example? Or what did a wedding ceremony look like at the time when Jesus turned water into wine? Why exactly was the ancient Baal worship so disgusting or evil? In this video, I want to give you some tools to find those answers for yourself. So today we're going to geek out a little bit, and I'm going to start with some of the most generic tools, and then I'm going to end this video by giving you the one Swiss Army knife tool that's going to do so many things in one package. So here we go. The first set of tools that I want to give us are what we call a Bible handbook or an atlas. So just kind of pulling off my shelf here, I have a couple of these that we'll look at. Now this is way back in the 1970s, but you'll still get the idea from a Bible atlas, just kind of moving backward to frontward, that it's showing you all these sort of historical, geographic pictures. It's giving you a sense of objects in space. It's giving you a sense of the pottery, the relief cuts, the archaeology that was taking place, the geographical settings. And so this kind of resource helps to start bringing the Bible to life. And of course, this is published, 30, 50, actually 50 years ago, and they've updated these kind of things. Here we have some maps. Sometimes they'll show you maps of different empires and moving through the land of Israel, or you might have maps that show the different tribes and where they were situated. So in other words, a Bible atlas can be really effective, again, to help us orient ourselves in a geographic location in history. Speaking of maps, I just wanted to show you, and I think I purchased these for $20, $30. This is like a zoom-in topographical map of the middle of Israel, which is really cool because if you're looking at it, here you can see spatially, like here's Jerusalem, here's Bethlehem. So when you're reading about the story of David fighting with the Philistines down through these valleys, you can actually track that on this kind of a tool, the topographical map. Or when David runs away from Saul, he follows this valley all the way down to En Gedi, down in here to this kind of rock formation down by the Dead Sea, and you can see where all the water is running off. So having a useful map like this can also be a really helpful resource to visualize the scriptures. Another one, as we're talking about kind of a handbook, I have a popular handbook of archaeology of the Bible. This is very similar to a Bible atlas, so I don't want to spend too much time on it, but as you open it up, for example, we'll just thumb through here. They're going to show you some charts, some of the, again, relief cuts or cylindrical inscriptions. Here's the cylinder of Nabonidus. Yeah, that guy from Babylonia in the time of Daniel. Those Babylonian names are always hard to pronounce. And we've got some papyrus fragments, and you just get the sense, and they do this by era or by kind of stages in history. Here we get some of the Assyrian sort of cylinders in a pentagonal shape. That's just a way that they can basically propagandize their country. They take that cylinder and they'll roll it onto clay, and they'll issue those clay tablets to people. Here's the Mesha stela, which is a famous stela. But anyway, this kind of a resource is really helpful to say, well, how do we know these things? Well, we've dug stuff out of the earth, and so a popular handbook of archaeology of the Bible can help us understand that. And then this is one of those resources. If you're going to pay $30, so much that you can get online nowadays. But if you're going to pay $30, $50 for a really nice graphic and colored book, a Bible handbook is the kind of book that you want to have on your shelf. Now, the way that a Bible handbook works is pretty simple. This one is literally like a handbook to the Bible, and it's going to follow by book of the Bible. So it starts in Genesis, and then it goes to Exodus, and then it just keeps going from there. And so if I just thumb through it, starting in the Old Testament, here's Genesis, and it's just giving you details. Again, it's going to pull in archaeology, it's going to pull in textual information, it's going to pull in just broad brushstrokes on whole chapters of the Bible or what the author is trying to accomplish. It's got some wonderful pictures. I'm going to fast forward here. Here's some, as we get through Egypt, you see some pictures of their migration or land and the life in Egypt. As they move into Israel, we've got the Judges and the Numbers, and we've got, you can just kind of see the different pictures, the charts, again, maps, and so on. And this just follows the Bible. Let's say I wanted to look at general stuff on Ephesus. Well, here I'm in Peter. I'm just going to back up to, there's Galatians. And here's something on Ephesus. It gives me some generic stuff on the book of Ephesus, and it follows it by clumps of chapters. So a Bible handbook is really great just to give you broad brush strokes. So these kind of Bible atlases and Bible handbooks will give you broad brush strokes. Let's move into the second kind of resource. This second kind of resource is like a pictorial dictionary or an encyclopedia. So a pictorial dictionary is very different. This is not a broad brushstroke. This is going to be more of a historical information, but populated in alphabetical order. And so let me just open it up and show you literally as we get into it, starting in the A's. And this isn't just stuff in the Bible, but it's historical figures that maybe the Bible just says one time, but it's pulling in information on that historical figure and loading it up for you in alphabetical order. And so we're in the A's and we're just following along here. And again, it's going to show you some pictures and charts and graphs and that kind of thing. So just for example, why this kind of tool would be helpful is, let's say I'm reading about the plants in the Bible, the olive tree, or acacia wood, for example, and I say, well, what is it about the plants in the Bible? And so I go back here to plants in the Bible, and it's going to load up for me, all of the different trees and plants and their usefulness to the people in that time. And so literally starting with the algum tree and down here in barley and beans and the bitter herbs, and then we're following F and G, the gourds, all the way through. So it's pretty, it's pretty detailed in some of those ways. Or if we were to go back to jewelry, for example, we don't really have a lot in the Bible that talks about the kind of jewelry that women or men would wear. Sometimes, they talk about piercing the ear with an owl, but what in the world is that? And so they have a whole thing on jewelry, and that's something that you can find, kind of generic information that you can find in this kind of a resource, or maybe a historical figure, or maybe a city. But a pictorial Bible dictionary can be really helpful to give you historical information loaded in alphabetical order. Two of the Bible dictionaries on the market that I would recommend for you would be the Zondervan's Bible Dictionary or the Thomas Nelson Bible Dictionary. And they're, of course, constantly updating these. And nowadays, the color and the pictures, the latest archaeological information, it's just all, they keep it up every couple of years. And so these are really wonderful resources because they package it, because of the way that it's delivered to you. I recommend to have these on your bookshelf. A third source of tools that we use are on a more textual level. I wanted to show us what we call a survey of the Old or the New Testament, or maybe a style of literature like poetry within the scriptures, or what we call the epistles, like the letters that Paul wrote to the churches are called epistles, or the Gospels, for example. And so I just wanted to show us very briefly, for example, I have some, again, these are older copies, but here's a popular survey of the Old Testament. And so it's just going to walk you through the Old Testament in these bigger clumps, and again, give you some generic information, but mostly focused more particularly on the text and not so much the historical information behind the text. And then again, you can pick up New Testament surveys, and they're going to do the exact same thing. Here I have a copy of Survey of the Epistles. You can find many types of these things. So with this kind of of resource, it really becomes who you trust or who you run to again, deliver that information to you. But that is a type of resource that we utilize. The fourth type of resource may be the most academic, and some of you are going to have a lot of fun with this. This is primary sources, ancient evidence and original sources. So for example, now this isn't an ancient source of the Bible, but just after the Bible, we see the 3rd century historian, the church historian Eusebius, and so we have all of his literature and his writings of that era. Or we have in the 1st century AD, Josephus, who would have been writing at the time that the Gospels were being written, for example, and he's writing about the history from Ezra and Nehemiah onward into the 1st century. And so he's just a heavyweight historical figure, and you can see how much he had written. And you've got Josephus, you've got Philo, another Jewish writer at that time. But the point is, we have their writings, and they've been translated into our languages so that we can study these, and they add to our understanding of the biblical world that Jesus was walking into, for example. We have Roman historians like Pliny, or I mentioned Eusebius, who was a church figure. And we also have what I've already kind of shown you guys, things like archaeology and the information that they're giving us. That's also a primary resource that enables us to understand the world that the Bible was written in. The fifth kind of resource is scholastic literature. This is where people who spend their whole day studying specific things then write books on what they've learned and what they've studied, a lot of times in original languages, and a lot of times on very narrow windows of, again, history or textual information. And so this field of study is very diverse. And so really what a key to kind of navigating this field is reading bibliographies at the end of a book. If you really liked a book and you say, where did they get their information? If you go back to the bibliography, you can start to see like some of the people that were writing in those times. To give you an example, here's a book from a Jew that believes Jesus was Messiah, and he looks back into the feasts of the Lord, or the festivities and the holidays that they practiced in the scriptures, and he shows you exactly how they practiced it back then and how Jesus was the fulfillment of them, that they were actually a type and a shadow of who Jesus is and was. And so what a wonderful resource this is one of my favorites on this topic. And so that's the feasts of the Lord. Well, here's another one that talks about the Bible manners and customs in their day. And so it gets into the weeds on, maybe how they dressed, or their agriculture, how they harvested their fields, or how the women would or would not relate to the men, or just all kinds of different information, their burial customs and so on. So that's a scholastic piece of work that a lot of people contributed towards, but it's very unique. Here's another one that's very unique, is Jewish law and Gentile churches in the New Testament. How did the Gentile believers interact with and or separate themselves from these Jewish customs? Well, there's a lot of scholarly work that goes into understanding that. Or maybe you want to know better how to interpret the Bible on complex issues. And so here's a book that looks at, and this was again like 30, 40 years ago, but they were looking at like, how do we practice the Bible on these difficult issues? Slavery, Sabbath, war, or women in the church or in church leadership, for example. That's a very specific resource. The Jewish background of the New Testament, that's a specific resource. One of my favorite books, Jesus Through Middle Eastern Eyes. It just peels back another layer of who our Messiah is in the culture that he inhabited. What a wonderful scholarly work by Kenneth Bailey. Or if you want to go all the way back to Genesis chapter 1 and research kind of how the Mesopotamians viewed the creation account and how our scriptures interact with the Mesopotamian understanding of the creation of the world, but then responded and brought forth this idea of Yahweh and his distinctiveness as creator. So you can just see finding primary sources from scholars in just a vast array of technical fields is really helpful to benefit our reading of the scriptures. And finally, we come to the sixth type of resource tool that we can utilize, and these are called commentaries. And that literally is what it sounds like. It's just people commenting on the scriptures or on a particular passage of the scripture. And so people have all kinds of things to say. Some people focus on the historical analysis, and some people focus on the textual analysis, and some people, like Calvin, for example, might focus on the theological analysis. And so different commentaries focus on different things. Some people are very practical, some people are very heady, and so you almost have to find out like who you enjoy reading and why, what you're looking for in a particular commentary. I know as a pastor, a couple of us really love William Barclay because he very succinctly, so for example, here's a commentary on the letter to the Romans. So it's focused very specifically, and we have one for every letter or every book of the New Testament, rather. And he does a great job of balancing like technical historical information with life application. And as a pastor and as one who reads the scripture devotionally, like that's why we just really appreciate his perspective, because he does both of those things. Exegesis is what we call kind of understanding what the message meant to the original audience, but then application, like what does that mean for my life and how do I change as a result of this aspect of my faith? And so there are different kinds of commentaries as mentioned. Here's a wonderful one, for example, in the book of Deuteronomy. So it's not just New Testament, it's Old Testament, and he does a great job of showing the continuity of God's character in God's covenant to the Jewish people, as well as the New Testament covenant. But that's a focus on Deuteronomy, or here's Kenneth Kitchen and his Ancient Orient and the Old Testament. He's just a heavyweight in this field. So again, another example of commentaries on the scriptures. Some of the commentaries that we enjoy going to, other than William Barclay, is, for example, you might find Matthew Henry's commentary, or the Expositor's Bible, or the New Interpreter's Bible. So as promised, I wanted to give you my one Swiss Army knife tool that does so many things in one package, and that is the New Interpreter's Study Bible. Now this one is, you'll notice if you read closely, is based on the New Revised Standard Version. That's a translation of the Bible. You can actually get all of the historical content with a different translation of the Bible. But what I love about this study Bible is, and as we were to open it up, it's going to give you a brief synopsis before every book of the Bible, about the historical information of that book and its literary narration and what they're trying to accomplish. But then under every single passage, there is a whole second half of the page that's giving you technical information about the text and or background, or cross-referencing the text to different parts of the Bible. It's connecting dots, it's connecting historical information, it's doing all kinds of things for you, and it's delivering it to you verse by verse. And so that's why it's really helpful as you're actually reading your devotional content in the morning to just look down a little further on the page to say, oh, here it says in verses 4 and 5, this is what that means, or this is what that word might mean in the original language, or this is, how we have 5 sources from the Qumran scrolls that, all this different stuff. And it's all right here in one Bible study tool. And that's really fun to have. In fact, another reason why I like this one is because through the Old and New Testament, we have like a 400 or 500 year gap. And the Jewish community was writing all kinds of interesting stuff. It's not scripture, but it's really interesting to show us what they were thinking. And it really, we call it the Apocrypha now, or the Pseudepigrapha. And so this tool includes the Apocrypha in this study Bible as well. And so that's helpful for us as biblical readers. So I hope for those of you that wanted to geek out and wanted to go a step further on kind of finding tools to help you read and understand the Bible and for the Bible to come to life, and again, so that you can understand Jesus and know who Jesus is and practice your faith, these things are invaluable. Don't be overwhelmed by it. Take your time, one step at a time, but stay hungry, stay thirsty, and keep learning, because it's in expanding our minds and expanding our understanding of the Word that we grow to know and love this wonderful God that we serve. So keep chasing after Him. He is totally worth it.